So today we have a speaker from University of California, San Diego, uh, Ish Kumar Jain. He is a third-year PhD student who works with Professor Dinesh Bharadia at UCSD. He designs and implements novel algorithms for wireless communication and sensing with a focus on millimeter wave system, vehicular communication, and virtual reality. In fact, Ish was the first person in my first year to reach out to me, and he was the first non-CMU wireless person who I met. He has worked extensively on millimeter wave systems and was also a part of the low KP paper at NSDI where I met him. He built a millimeter wave testbed at 28 gigahertz, which he'll be talking about today, to evaluate and address user mobility challenges at these millimeter wave frequencies. Apart from research, he enjoys working with student organizations, organize campus-wide events, and often visit nearby hiking trails. So over to you, Ish.
Okay. Thanks, Akshay, for nice introduction. And with that, I'm going to start this talk. So yeah, today, in this talk, I will talk about our experiences in building 28 gigahertz testbed, which is especially designed to address mobility challenges at millimeter wave frequencies. So first thing, why millimeter wave? Here we show the spectrum allocation for 5G by the FCC. We see that the low and mid bands are overcrowded, with roughly 400 megahertz bandwidth allocated for communication. On the other hand, the high millimeter wave band has almost 2 gigahertz of allocated bandwidth. So the availability of this high bandwidth enables many high throughput applications while supporting many more devices. So the most exciting application that requires millimeter wave high data rates are vehicular communication and augmented or virtual reality. So in future, when these self-driving cars are more common, these vehicles would be loaded with sensors such as cameras, LiDARs, and they generate huge amount of data. They need to collaborate with each other and share this data to the infrastructure cloud for applications such as vehicular safety. Similarly, for virtual reality or augmented reality, these headset delivers high quality videos and possibly over a wireless link in future. So to deliver these high throughput for these applications, the millimeter wave system uses very directional beams, and these are pointed towards the user. These directional links can combat higher path loss at these frequencies, but they bring many challenges. So one of the biggest challenge with millimeter wave is mobility. Even with a small movement, they can cause beams to become misaligned and lead to loss of throughput. There are many solutions which have been proposed to tackle this problem, but they are not rigorously tested in practice. So to better understand and solve these mobility-based challenges, we need insights from various real-world testbeds. So there are many testbeds that are developed over last few years. As you can see, most of these testbeds are designed for 60 gigahertz research. While 60 gigahertz has been known since 2013, there is barely any deployment at this time. However, this 28 gigahertz spectrum is recently allocated, and these are the bands that would be widely deployed in near future. The systems at 60 gigahertz and 28 gigahertz are different in many ways. While 60 gigahertz uses IEEE 802.11ad, the 28 gigahertz spectrum uses 5G NR. Moreover, the propagation characteristics at 28 gigahertz is vastly different from that of 60 gigahertz. In particular, the 60 gigahertz suffers from higher path loss and atmospheric attenuation. In the near future, when 28 gigahertz adoption will further increase, but we barely understand this 28 gigahertz spectrum. So therefore, we need testbeds at 28 gigahertz to keep up with the current trends. We create M-Mobile, a 28 gigahertz testbed with a focus on mobility-based experiments. We share our experiences and valuable insights that we learned from building such a testbed. The unique aspect of our testbed are that it is 5G NR compliant, it provides mobility support, and it is easy to replicate by other research groups. We also demonstrated a low complexity beam tracking algorithm on our testbed that leverages the 5G NR waveform structure. Finally, we release one of its kind mobility dataset that can be used to improve beam management further. We believe in future, when the testbeds are available, there are more testbeds at 28 gigahertz, which supports user mobility. This dataset will grow and greatly benefit our research community. So we start with explaining the requirements and challenges for building a mobility-centric 28 gigahertz testbed. It consists of a base station or a G Node B and a mobile user equipment. The base station requires high baseband processing to support up to 400 megahertz of bandwidth. It should contain phased arrays with fast beamforming capabilities. It should support 5G NR5 specifications and satisfy other stringent requirements such as phase noise. At the user side, we can have lower bandwidth of up to 100 megahertz, which is still large compared to a sub-6 gigahertz system. The user should have a small form factor which can be carried in hand or in a car. And finally, it should be able to work with a single power supply, possibly from a car. So let's go into the detail of our testbed design. First, we will address the challenge of high processing requirement at the G Node B. We use 1 gigasample per second ADCs and DACs to meet this requirement of 400 megahertz bandwidth at the base station. This is supported by an open source FPGA implementation for the baseband processing. We connect this FPGA with a host PC through PCIe interface and stream 5G NR waveforms from the PC. Finally, we use an external off-the-shelf mixer to convert the baseband signal to IF frequencies, which is required by our phased array module. So next, we'll talk about the challenges in a small form factor design at the mobile node. We used a software-defined radio platform which can support the required 100 megahertz bandwidth with the appropriate daughter card. The streaming at 100 megahertz bandwidth is possible through a 10 gigahertz Ethernet link, which is generally not available on laptops. So we modified the USRP FPGA to selectively send only those symbols which are loaded with channel estimation pilots. In this way, we could just use a laptop and carry it around with the software-defined radio, and this will be a compact setup to move around. The third design aspect is the phased array and how to control it. We need a large phased array to create directional links and steer them very effectively. Our phased array is dual polarized with a total of 64 antennas. We used a DC board to power the array, and this DC board also hosts a small form factor FPGA for programming the weights in real time. Our phased array module is integrated with a 28 gigahertz transceiver on the same PCB that up or down converts the signal from intermediate frequency to millimeter wave. The phased array module was designed in at UCSD by our collaborators. Finally, we look at the clock synchronization. Here, we address the challenge of stringent phase noise and frequency stability performance according to 5G NR specifications. We used a single PLL to supply clock to both IF and RF. And this helps in reducing the phase noise of our system. We also synchronize the clock at all the nodes, the G Node B and the mobile node, with a GPS disciplined oscillator, and this removes other frequency offsets. So here is the picture of various components that we use in our testbed. We show our dual polarized phased array with 64 antennas, the baseband FPGA, which is KCU 105 from Xilinx, and the IF mixer from Qorvo that we used at the base station. We also show USRP X300. It uses a CBX120 daughter card, and it can provide the required 100 megahertz of bandwidth. So with this setup, we are able to do some experiments, and here is the performance of our testbed. So we established end-to-end link and showed that the testbed is well designed. It has low phase noise, and it can support up to 256 QAM constellation, as you can see on the left. We also measure the beam patterns, and with these 64 antennas, our beam patterns are very, very accurate. And you can see the measured beam pattern in anechoic chamber. They matches very well with the theory patterns. So now that we have verified our testbed, we move to demonstrate a beam tracking algorithm on it. So on the left, we show the conventional beam scanning method, which kind of exhaustively scan multiple beams and acquires the correct beam that serves the user. This method incurs very high overhead and especially for high mobility scenarios. In contrast, our smart beam tracking algorithm, it should acquire the correct beam without having any scanning overhead. So there is a significant amount of literature on beam tracking, and we discuss a few of them here. The first is history based, where a select set of good beams are identified during initial scanning, and these beams are reused when the original one is blocked or misaligned because of mobility. But this method works only for static environments and if there is slow mobility. The second one is sensor based, where some external sensors such as GPS or IMU, they are used to assist the beam forming. But these methods also suffer from low accuracy due to poor sensor readings, and importantly, they also collect important sensitive information like user information. The third is wide beam based, which uses a wide angular beam to reduce beam misalignments. But wide beam has low directivity, and therefore it reduces the overall throughput. Finally, we have the more conventional channel based. These methods only rely on wireless channel estimates for tracking. One of the challenges for these methods is the noise in the wireless channel, which corrupts the channel measurements, and there are many other propagation impairments. So our algorithm is channel based because these are self-contained without relying on any external sensors and are widely used in our conventional communication system. So here we describe our channel-based beam tracking algorithm. Our idea is to use continuous channel measurements to monitor the signal strength. As the user moves, the signal strength degrades due to beam misalignment. Here, our insight is that this degradation in signal strength is proportional to the shape of the beam pattern itself. We use this insight to compute the approximate angle of movement by the user, and based on that, we refine our beam. But in practice, these channel measurements are noisy, as I said before, and we used some kind of filtering techniques, like we applied Kalman filter to smoothen out the channel response. So here we now show that our channel-based tracking algorithm can be implemented with 5G NR compliant waveform. The standard employs a frame structure with periodic SS burst or synchronization signal burst followed by data symbols. The SS burst consists of multiple SS blocks, and these SS blocks are used for initial beam acquisition. So these SS block, they occupies contiguous frequency and time resources, and they introduce high overhead for 5G NR. And in some cases, it can be as high as like 25% of the channel airtime. On the other hand, the CSIRS, or the channel state information reference signal, they incur low overhead because they are embedded in data. And therefore, we use the CSIRS channel estimate in our beam tracking algorithm. Since the CSIRS is simultaneous with data communication, the overhead is virtually removed. So here I present the overview of our beam tracking. As I explained before, the SS burst is used for initial beam scan, and CSIRS is used for beam tracking. So using our beam scan, we first estimate the initial angle of departure to the user and establish the directional beam. Next, we use our CSIRS channel impulse response, and we take the peak of the CIR plot and keep track of this power. We observe that this channel power decays uniformly when the user moves. We use these measurements to estimate the change in AOD related to the initial AOD that we measured during the beam acquisition. Finally, we refine the beam towards the new user, and this closes our loop. So here, one thing to note is we cannot perform this beam tracking for quite long duration because there could be blockages or the user might move out of the coverage area. So for these cases, we detect very sharp decay in the signal strength, and we go back to our initial beam acquisition, or maybe perform some handovers. So in order to evaluate our beam tracking algorithm, we collect channel measurement traces in variety of indoor and outdoor environments. We move the user in a particular trajectory and continuously sweep the transmitter beam. So on the left, you see our setup in an outdoor environment. In this setup, the user is initially placed at 10 meters from the G node B, and we move it perpendicular to the link direction for roughly 6 meters. And in this way, we like keep the user at different locations and move it in different directions and collect channel data. And the data is collected for all the beams at all user locations in the trajectory. So in the figure you see in the right, we visualize our channel data. Here, x-axis describes the beam angle, and y-axis is the user locations on the trajectory. And the brighter colors correspond to better signal strength. So using this rich channel measurement data set, we believe other beam management solutions, which can also be tested in real world scenario without even requiring the test bed. So here we discuss the throughput performance of our algorithm over time for a mobile user. When the user moves, the signal strength decays significantly if no beam tracking or beam acquisition is performed in middle. In this case, we see a large degradation in throughput, and the link goes down to outage. We show the baseline where we perform high overhead beam acquisition with high frequency. So here we perform another beam acquisition at 100 millisecond, and this will avoid the outage, but we see that there's a very marginal improvement compared to no tracking. Finally, we show our beam tracking algorithm, which finds the user direction without any overhead. And we see that this continuous channel tracking achieves much higher throughput compared to the baseline. So we look at the average performance of throughput across various test scenarios. And we show that for indoor scenario, we get roughly 1.4 times better throughput. And in outdoor, we get 1.6 times better performance in outdoor scenarios. So these results demonstrate that our channel-based tracking algorithm incurs low overhead and they outperforms the traditional methods. So with this, I summarize my talk. And the key takeaway message is that the mobility is an important problem for millimeter wave. And we have mostly like overlooked this from our systems community. And in this work, we have demonstrated a low complexity beam tracking algorithm on a millimeter wave testbed that we designed. And we have also released our channel measurement dataset in the link below. And we believe like this dataset will be useful to evaluate any future algorithms for solving this mobility problem in a real world setting. So with this, I conclude my talk, and I would like to thank my collaborators here at UCSD. You can see the list of authors, and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah.
And maybe if you have any questions, I can take.
Yeah, thanks Ish for the great talk. So let me start off with a question and then others can follow because I always have too many questions. So, so one thing which I'm a little bit curious about is in your setup, was there a shared clock across the transmitter and receiver? No, right?
No. The clock is different. We use ADF 5355. It's a clock available from analog devices, but we connect them with the external GPS DO oscillator.
Okay, so it's synchronized independently, right?
Yeah, it's synchronized independently, but it is fairly accurate.
So that 256 QAM image that you showed, was it at the closest range or was it at the farthest range? Because I have also
that is
worked
a
with
good
this.
question. We don't, for that we keep it close, roughly I would say around 5 meter indoor. And also like in indoor the GPS doesn't work, so we have to keep the GPS antenna near to the wall to get like good synchronization.
Okay, yeah, because like I have worked with some of these finicky millimeter wave birds, and it's really bad when you go at long range. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, but these phased arrays which we are using, so these are individually tested by like people who make them, and they claim that they can support like wideband 2 gigahertz over up to 300 meters. So the
Ah,
phased arrays are very good. The phase noise comes from the baseband and
of course, yeah.
IF. So that we need to take care of.
Okay. I have a question. Great talk. You mentioned this 28 gigahertz being sort of a relatively underexplored direction, right? So can you tell me a little bit about what you learned about how beam track? I mean, because beam tracking in 60 gigahertz there's been a lot of excitement around that and some work around that. I haven't seen too much in the 28 gigahertz space. So what did you learn in 28 gigahertz in sort of this outdoor 5G NR sort of context that requires a different sort of beam tracking approach to what you see in the 60 gigahertz spectrum?
Okay, so yeah, great question. One important thing that I learned is uh, we can design these phased arrays much better at 28 gigahertz. Like if you see other testbed at 60 gigahertz, the phased arrays, they say they produce very irregular patterns, and you cannot trust the channel measurement data. You basically do some kind of blind estimation, or just do a bunch of similar to exhaustive search to find out the beam. But here what we are claiming is that these beam patterns are very robust. They almost matches with theory, and so we can leverage like a lot of theoretical literature in designing the beam patterns using some filters based techniques and other techniques, and this will give us very nice smooth channel measurements data as the user moves. And these channel based techniques, which were not possible at 60 gigahertz because of rough channel propagation, higher losses because of antenna as well as because of environment, we don't have that at 20 gigahertz. So we need to rethink the kind of algorithms we should use at 20 gigahertz and design maybe better systems compared to 60 gigahertz.
Thanks.
Uh, so I had a question about the phased arrays you designed. Is it just because you had a lot of antennas on it? That's why was it very directional? And another thing I want to get a sense of is like how good, how do you actually enable a G node B? Because I was reading your workshop paper the other day, and I was really curious because you need 400 megahertz of receive simultaneously, and I don't know of any cheap SDR that I can buy, which is more than 100 megahertz. So how do you actually achieve that 400 megahertz at the base station?
Yeah, so here we like don't design it from scratch. We leverage the design which Professor Shinyu has developed like for OpenMili. So we use their FPGA basement platform, and it uses 1 giga sample ADCs and DAC. So ideally we can achieve up to 1 gigahertz of bandwidth with those platform. And they have even open source the FPGA code. So if you can buy a KC105 board, and you can use the FPGA images and get those high bandwidths. And we kind of we do some digital tricks based on our IF mixer, which only supports single channel up conversion. So we kind of do some digital tricks to up convert the signal at the required IF frequencies, and overall it limits our bandwidth to 500 or 400 megahertz, which is basically like what we require.
I also have a few questions about the hardware. Can you actually go to slide 12? I don't
Oh, yeah.
understand your setup.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I'll have the rest of it. So first thing that I saw here, like, did you actually design the 32 element antennas, antenna array on that board?
Yeah, this is designed by Professor Gabriel Rebis. He is a circuits professor here at UCSD.
Oh, I see. Because yeah, from the picture, it looks like these, like each of the patch antennas have different polarization. I wanted to ask if there is any reason for having this, or how actually this whole antenna element works.
So it has two arrays. One on the top you see 34 elements, which is for horizontal channel, and bottom array is for V channel. And this will create like this H and V are independent. We can have both active at the same time, and they will create two orthogonal streams. They are both fed by different IF, so you can actually connect two different USRPs to each of these channels and have some sort of MIMO link as well. And this MIMO link will use like this polarization to create two links which don't interfere with each other.
I see, that's cool. Also, even inside one of that section, the horizontal vertical is the same, but every column has a inverse polarization. Like the feed points are on different sides, so I assume that also means they have like on the same plane, but they have reverse direction of
polarization. Yeah, I think that is just to simplify the circuit design. But they the only difference we need to do is maybe apply a minus alternative and two alternative antennas.
Yep.
And
so
then
you get 32 measurements for a transmission on that plane. Okay, makes sense. Yep, correct. Okay, cool. The other thing, like these are the things that I'm now working on, so it gets my attention. So slide 19 also, you showed the degree, like the angle resolution, which I see like that it's 1 degree resolution as you're increasing it, but still the peak is quite wide. Like it's about 10 degree is the whole range of the peak, which I assume in a 32 element array, it should be a lot like thinner than this one. Like, have you done like more analysis exactly, like you can get the angle right? Like if you're doing localization, for example, with this, do you have 10 degree error or you have 1 degree error? And no motion. Yeah, you don't have tracking information.
Yeah, so we did those measurements, like we scan these beams and find out the initial AOD, and because at like roughly 8 antennas in a row, we can get around 12 degree of beam width. So the half power beam width is 12 degree.
I see.
Like we can use the 4 vertical antennas to narrow down beam in vertical direction, but horizontal direction beam width would be 12 degrees. So we get roughly of that kind of error. Like if we assume 3 dB of error margin, then we will have 12 degree of.
I see. Okay, cool. Thank you.
What does the GPSDO buy you? Like, what becomes harder if you do not have synchronized clock?
Then first thing, like we see a lot of clock offset. The CFO would be large, and like other than CFO, I think the sampling offsets, like the sampling time offset, like they will start at like different times if the clocks are not synchronized.
So does it mean you cannot do communication at all, or can you just not do tracking, or what can you do if you have that type of CFO and sample offset?
So so one thing that it improves is the phase noise. So if we don't have this frequency offset, then the phase noise performance of the clock that we are using, the external clock, it would be better, and we can compact more and more subcarriers. And we have shown with 240 kilohertz subcarrier spacing that is required by 5G NR. And so yeah, that is one thing. And in terms of this 5G NR has to be very tightly synchronized. Like unlike 60 gigahertz, which like 802.11 AD protocols, which does not need very tight synchronization. You can have like channel CSMA kind of channel access, but here with the cellular network, say 5G NR, the base station has to allocate very sharp time frequency resources to the users, and it needs like slot symbol level synchronization for communication between G-Node B and user. So we are trying to achieve that with using these GPS-to synchronization with our test bed.
So I have a question. If I buy the exact equipment that you used and I set up those 2 nodes, what is the range I could achieve at the smallest data rate possible? Let's say like 4 QAM or something, if I want to go as far as possible.
Yeah, we didn't test like long. The longest we have like tested ourselves was 30 meter. and probably because like we didn't take it out on roads, we just tested on the area that was available to us. But like in the paper where like circuits paper where they publish results about the phased array, they claim that it works up to like 300 meters, which is very impressive.
Yeah, it's really, really impressive.
It would be like the lowest modulation.
4 QAM or 2
possible,
QAM,
but
right?
yeah, but yeah, like, but it is surprising that the link can work for such a long distance.
It's interesting. Is 28 gigahertz the frequencies that are being allocated to cellular?
Yes, yeah.
So then how are you able to do the experiment? Because then you will need cellular licenses, right?
Yeah, we have UCSD area has FCC license approval.
Oh, okay, for
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay, you got that approval. Okay.
One more thing. So there is this trade-off between like doing a wider band versus doing better tracking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you explored that trade-off, and what do you think is the difficulty in exploring that trade-off? Because in the figure you showed, like when something has it is at a greater distance, sure, the throughput is worse because the SNR is lower, but then it's moving a smaller angle, so the tracking is better.
So actually the tracking is better when we have more directional beams. So that even for a small movement, we can see that the signal power decays faster, and there's a significant, like not too significant, but there's good enough power decay which we can detect, and it is out of the noise range, and we can detect the angle accurately. So yeah, in that regard, like if we are doing tracking, then directional beams are good. The wide beams are good if we just want to use the wide beam and we don't want to perform tracking very often.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you can actually use time division multiplexing to change between different beam widths, right? Because you have the front end is all programmable, right? Have you thought about basically doing some time scheduling on doing tracking at the same time you actually keep a steady connection to the device, so you can basically have the best of the two worlds, right? You can send data at the same time as you're doing tracking by doing type basically TDMA.
Yes, and what you're talking about, there is actually a paper on it. I don't recall the name, but what they do is they start with a narrow beam at set equal to 0, and then as the user moves, they try to like understand how the signal changes, and they widen the beam gradually over time to account for user mobility. So yeah, some sort of like TDD based technique and use wider beam at different time might work, because initially when you have like very good certainty of where the user is, you can use very narrow beam, and over time if there are more uncertainty, then you can widen the beam gradually. But the drawback would be that if we can use directional beam all the time, then why not use that? We can continuously enjoy high throughput.
Of course, you can also have multiple clients to track, for example. I'm just saying the bandwidth is so high that you can probably sample orders of magnitude higher than you actually need to for the tracking. I don't know how fast your vehicles go over in San Diego, but I know they're kind of slow here. So I was like, why do you need FPGAs for the BIM, the front end, right? Because you don't really need it to be that high. But it makes sense if you're trying to do something like time division multiplexing or changing the bandwidth so fast so to, for example, comply with multiple users.
Yes, that's an interesting point. Right now we have tested with single user, but our testbed we are designing so that it can support multiple users as well. So using this wide bandwidth, we can divide frequencies for multiple users, or as you said, we can do even TDD. And for example, if we take TDD, then what will happen if there are two users? Then the continuous channel measurements that we are getting, the frequency of that would be lower as we add more and more channels, more and more users. So then we need to design algorithms which can take like a sampled version of channel and it still perform like accurate tracking. So that would be a good direction. Yeah.
Yep.
So thanks. So Ish, I have one question. So since my advisor is also on the call. So how much does it cost if I have two X310s and I want to build your system end to end with both transmitter and receiver? How much does it cost to?
So with just using USRP, it is simple. The most difficult part is to get the phased array. So
Okay.
I feel like the array that we are using, we are lucky that we are at UCSD.
Of course. Yeah.
But there are other vendors that like they don't sell the arrays like in public, but if you like collaborate with them, most likely sign the NDA and you get the array. We have seen that all the arrays, like during my first year, we got some arrays from industry. It's a Peregrine Semiconductor, and the design of the array is similar. Like you get some signal around like 3 gigahertz IF, which you can get directly from your USRP. You fed it to the array. The array, like most of the arrays, like they have integrated transceivers which up convert the signal. So you don't have to worry about the higher frequency up conversion. And you can directly connect it with USRP and it will work. And they provide software interface to control.
But they will be costly, of course, because they are like companies. So
yes, that would be costly, like roughly say 10K or 20K.
Okay, that's not costly for wireless group, but it's still costly a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just asking, just in case, like if I in future, like 2-3 years down the line, if I want to build a system like this, what does it cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Akash, go.
I've been raising my hand from that time. And
I'm sorry, I didn't notice.
We don't use the raise hand feature. We just
okay.
Ask questions.
I missed the first few minutes. So in I think it is on the lines of what Swarun asked. So in 802.11 AD, people concluded that when they're doing the beam tracking and things like that, the channels were very sparse in the spatial domain. There weren't many multipaths. So the techniques which they developed for beam tracking were more towards fast scanning, basically the better search, and like I don't know, basically optimizing that time. It's still a linear scan. How you scan is the question. So that is what they were thinking. So here I want to know if you had any experiences with strong multipaths, which at your frequency, which weren't at like the actual beam position, where it should have been, but somehow even if you use a suboptimal tracking algorithm, just because the multipath is so heavy, did it really help you retain the throughput or something like that? Yeah, whatever your experience with multipath is at this frequency.
Okay, so I see like you're asking maybe two questions. One is like compressed sensing based tracking which has low overhead, and second is like these multipath which are like there could be few multipath compared to sub 6 gigahertz, but how they affect this tracking. So regarding first question, like the compressed sensing, yes, they reduce this kind of like exhaustive search based method. You can do it faster, but I remember the complexity is still proportional to say number of antennas or number of beam directions. It is, I think, logarithmic in number of beams. And you can even see other work by Professor Haytham. They design fast beam alignment. It's a paper in SIGCOMM sometime. And they compare against this compressed sensing based. And they say that using some kind of like searching multiple beams simultaneously, you can get better and faster performance compared to compressed sensing. So, but their complexity is also logarithmic in number of beam directions that you try, depending on how many simultaneous beams you are searching. So, like the thing is like these beam training methods that are there, you can do it much faster, but still they will be like you need to somehow scan the space. Either use some kind of random beams in compressed sensing or some kind of like multiple beams together. It will incur some overhead. And when the user is moving like at a high speed, then you need to repeat this more often. So what our idea is, like, we use this channel embedded into the data, which don't have overhead, and we can delay this high overhead initial beam acquisition so that we don't have to perform very often for high mobility scenarios. So this is one thing. And second, you ask about multipath. So you can explore multipath using these compressed sensing or other techniques. Even if you scan exhaustively, you can find out different directions like line of sight and non-line of sight paths. And since they are sparse, you might be able to simply look at just find them using a simple compressed sensing based technique. And mostly line of sight beam is available. We can establish the line of sight beam to the user. And while doing tracking, we get channel which has all the paths. And that's why I emphasize we are taking the channel state information, CSI, and we take the peak power, which correspond to the direct beam, which is right now established, most likely the line of sight beam, and we track that power. So in the CSI, we can reject multipaths, which are far away from the direct path. And by leveraging this high bandwidth, you can even separate out multipaths, and they won't affect the tracking performance. Like, you can estimate very accurate angles.
So so let me, I guess, yeah, you answered part of it, but what I really wanted to know was, if you don't care about speed of acquisition or something like that, and you had like a 60 gigahertz link and a 28 gigahertz link, and you are scanning at all angles, 60 gigahertz link will be it'll have a nice channel response at the point where you care about. That is what empirical observations showed in like previous works. But here, in a typical outdoor setting like you have on the slide now, would it still be like that? Or I just want to understand if the target is at 0 degrees, will you still have at 0 degrees, or are the reflectors, common reflectors which you see around you, are they so highly reflective that all of them have, there are multiple angles with high power?
Yeah, we see multipaths are important actually. So even at 28 gigahertz, if the direct path beam is kind of like not available due to some reason, the reflected paths can serve the beam. The signal strength would be low, and we see that like, even I have seen some literature where people test 60 and 28 together, and they also claim that 28 gigahertz reflectors are important. They don't have as severe attenuation compared to 60 gigahertz. And so you can establish a non-line of sight beam that would be maybe like 5 to 10 dB lower than, say, direct beam, but that will still serve the user. So multipaths are important.
Okay, sounds good. Then I have a follow-up question to this. So I don't really know 5G NR standards, but at a time, would you still have one main lobe coming out of the antenna, or will it have like, so in 802.11 AD, the beamforming codebook was such that you can get like multiple beams at different angles, and based on how you steer beamforming vectors, you can, it's not just one beam which comes out, it's like 4 or 5 beams. So if you can get like 4 or 5 beams, I'm not sure how your beam pattern was for your patch antenna setup, 32 element patch antenna setup. But if there are 4 or 5 beams, doesn't the algorithm for tracking become significantly different? Because you're saying multipath is important. Multipath is, like, it has some information, and it doesn't give you the best throughput, but it at least has some nice SNR value. So yeah, I just wanted to understand if that matters.
What you are suggesting, if you have multiple beams, then there would be more multipath.
Yes.
And the multipaths might help, like, so for tracking, like, because we are tracking one of the beam, then we need to like remove the effect of multipath, because that will like reduce the like performance of algorithm,
I
like
see.
because we want to estimate like how much the user has moved, how much angle user has moved, and that we have to find for the beam which is like serving the user, and we are kind of slowly tracking the power of that beam. So yeah, the kind of scenario you are suggesting, because we have this dual polarized arrays V and H, we can maybe also have two beams, one using 32H antenna, one using 32B antennas, and we can like we can have like beams in different direction. They would support like maybe two USRPs to generate two stream as well. So yeah, like
So
these kind of
currently you just
this
have
kind
one
of
main
setup.
lobe, is it?
Yeah, this we currently only deploy like single directional beam. We don't use V and H. We only
So
tested
you
with
can set a theta and phi, choose a beam forming vector, and it will just point at that direction.
yeah, we have tested with that. So yeah, in future we are planning to leverage, because we have this dual polarized arrays, we can create maybe two beams and serve maybe two users simultaneously. So
Yeah, I'm thinking that there should be a place for that, because like it was there in the standard for 802.11ad. They weren't specifically using one direction beams. They were using beams with multiple side lobes. It could be to serve multiple clients or faster scanning and all those things. Just wondering what is the place for that in 28 gigahertz.
But
Anyway,
Akash, isn't in cellular they are going to have directional beams? So instead of having multiple beams at a single base station, what they will do is they'll have they will sector the cell into angles, and then they will basically send these beams only along those directions and get the throughput and range, which is the big cell, because multipath resilience is not a big cell of 5G, right? So I think if cellular
no, but what I was saying is, if okay, in say 120 degree, 120 degree, 120 degree, you have three sets of massive MIMO antennas at the base station. Each 120 degree, if it has only one main lobe, it can only serve one client at a time, right? But if it has three, not main lobe, but three side lobes, okay, it can serve three independent clients at the same time, provided it knows what direction to point at, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that
these
is
phased
antenna
array,
engineering, right? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So just to add, like these phased array have limited range, like angular range. So like our phased array only works like up to 120 degrees, like -60 to 60. So you have seen a paper by Professor Shinyu. They design X array where they connect like multiple of these arrays
Yes.
at 60 gigahertz, and
Yes.
there they claim that you can maybe like cover the entire 360 space. So that's the kind of setup you're talking about, right? Like at the base station, it can serve all the users in across all 360 space, and using this kind of like multiple side beams to serve multiple users.
I think we are already at the time 2 p.m. as well. So thank you, Ish, for the amazing talk, and all the others for the amazing discussion. I think we can reach out to you over on the Slack channel as well if we have
Yeah,
questions.
sure. If you have any questions.
And what was how did you come up with the name M-Mobile?
So I think that is coined by my co-author Raghav.
Okay.
And
is there a joke?
yeah, M for millimeter wave and mobile, because
Okay.
that is what one of the selling point that we want to convey, that the mobility is really important. And this is especially like a big challenge at 28 gigahertz, because there you need to support like V2X kind of settings where high mobility is actually a problem.
Great. Thanks, Ish.